Have you ever wondered if some people are truly above morality? If there are individuals who, due to their intelligence or willpower, have the right to decide what is right or wrong? And more importantly, have you ever felt, in some way, that you were superior to others? Fyodor Dostoevsky explored these questions in a brutal way in Crime and Punishment, a novel that not only dives into the psychological abyss of a murderer, but also forces us to confront something uncomfortable, the illusion of moral superiority. In the book, Raskolnikov believes that certain people, the so-called extraordinary men, are above the rules that govern the rest of humanity. He convinces himself that he can commit a heinous crime in the name of a greater good. But Dostoevsky shows us that this is not how the human conscience works. As the author himself wrote, man has everything in his hands, and yet he allows himself to be led like a coward. Pride can be a subtle poison. It makes us believe we are smarter, more righteous, more deserving than others. And ironically, this belief isolates us, destroys us from within, until we realize, too late, that we were never above anything, that the true punishment began long before any official sentence. In this video, we will dissect Raskolnikov's downfall, understand how Dostoevsky warns us about the dangers of intellectual arrogance, and uncover the true lesson behind crime and punishment. Let's begin. Raskolnikov, a former law student, lives in misery in a tiny, cramped room in St. Petersburg. But his greatest anguish does not come from poverty. It comes from a dangerous conviction. He believes that humanity is divided into two types of people. On one side, there are ordinary men, those who follow the rules, obey laws, and live without achieving great deeds. On the other, there are extraordinary men, superior individuals who have the right to break the rules in the name of something greater. This idea is inspired by historical figures like Napoleon Bonaparte, who, according to Raskolnikov, would never have become an emperor if he had been concerned with common morality. He writes an essay arguing that these special men can disregard ethics because their actions are justified by the progress they bring to the world. And so, the question arises, am I one of these extraordinary men? Raskolnikov decides to test his theory. He chooses a victim, an old pawnbroker who, according to him, exploits the poor. His plan is simple: kill her, steal her money, and use it for something greater. If he can commit the crime without remorse, it will prove that he belongs to the elite of history's great men. There are many men whom an unexpected thought, a new idea, no matter how absurd it may seem, can drive to crime. Dostoevsky shows us how an abstract idea can turn into a psychological trap. Raskolnikov does not kill out of hatred or revenge, but as a purely intellectual exercise. And yet, the moment the crime happens, he discovers a devastating truth. Theory does not match reality. What he imagined to be an act of greatness turns into a nightmare of paranoia and guilt. His body trembles, his mind unravels, he can barely hide the evidence, and worst of all, his conscience will not let him rest. The murderer, if he has a conscience, must suffer. That is his punishment. Here's the irony. Raskolnikov wanted to prove he was above morality, but he discovers that his own mind condemns him before the police even begin their investigation. The philosophy of the extraordinary man is not only dangerous but also false. Dostoevsky suggests that no one can escape their own humanity. What defines us is not cold logic, but the invisible bonds that connect us to others. And from that moment on, Raskolnikov enters a labyrinth of suffering from which he may never escape. The crime was committed, the plan executed, but contrary to what Raskolnikov expected, he doesn't feel empowered, enlightened, or transformed into a great man. He feels sick. In the days following the murder, he is consumed by paranoia. He believed the greatest obstacle would be the police, but he soon discovers that his true enemy lies within himself. Dostoevsky describes this mental torment with precision. Raskolnikov oscillates between intense fevers, delirium, and a growing sense of persecution. Every glance on the street seems suspicious. Every conversation could be a trap. It wasn't ordinary torment. It wasn't just the fear of being caught. It was something deeper, as if his soul were being crushed by an invisible weight. The great revelation of Crime and Punishment is that punishment doesn't come from human justice, but from conscience. Raskolnikov believed he could ignore morality as if it were merely a rule imposed by society. But guilt proves that morality isn't external. It is rooted in the very essence of human nature. And this is where a fundamental concept comes into play: hyperconsciousness. Jean-Paul Sartre, decades later, would write that hell is other people, because it is in the gaze of others that our identity is formed. Raskolnikov experiences exactly this kind of hell. He feels that everyone sees him as a criminal, even though no one knows the truth. With each passing day, he isolates himself more. He avoids his best friend, Razumikin, and rejects any human contact. But distancing himself brings no relief. On the contrary, it only makes the guilt more intense. He didn't know that the human mind can get used to anything, even its own hell. The only person who seems to see through him is Inspector Porfiry Petrovich. Unlike an ordinary policeman, Porfiry doesn't just look for concrete evidence. He plays with Raskolnikov's mind, throwing words and insinuations that make his guilt bubble to the surface. Criminals are like moths. They can't resist the flame. They always return to the scene of the crime. Porfiry's words echo in Raskolnikov's mind. He realizes he is being pulled toward his own destruction. Every movement seems to betray him. His pride resists, but his conscience has already condemned him. And then Sonia appears. Sonia, the young prostitute, lives in even worse poverty than he does. But unlike Raskolnikov, she doesn't see herself as special or superior to anyone. Her unwavering faith and kindness stand in stark contrast to the protagonist's destructive pride. Unknowingly, Raskolnikov is drawn to this simplicity, as if, in front of her, his mask of superiority begins to crumble. In the most intense moment of the book, he confesses to Sonia, I killed for myself, just for myself. And here lies the truth he had been trying to avoid from the beginning. He didn't kill for justice or to prove himself extraordinary. He killed out of vanity. And now, vanity is devouring him from within. Sonia, instead of condemning him, weeps. She sees his suffering and understands that his greatest punishment is not prison. It is his own shattered soul. But she gives him advice. Confess. Face the truth. Raskolnikov still resists. He doesn't want to surrender, but deep down, he knows there is no other way out. The man who lies to himself and listens to his own lie comes to a point where he can no longer distinguish the truth within him. He realizes that the real prison has already closed in around him. Even in freedom, he is not being hunted by the police. He is being hunted by himself. And now, the question remains, will he have the courage to face the truth, or will he keep running until he destroys himself completely? Raskolnikov had never been so alone. He distanced himself from his best friend, Razumikin, rejected the unconditional love of his mother and sister, and now finds himself trapped in a labyrinth built by his own pride. Each day, his arrogance becomes more of a burden, another brick in the wall that separates him from others. But why does he do this? Why does he despise those who try to help him? The answer lies in pride. Raskolnikov wants to believe he doesn't need anyone, that his mind is strong enough to carry him, that his intelligence is enough. But the great irony and the great tragedy is that this pride only makes him weaker. Dostoevsky shows us how the illusion of superiority does not strengthen but weakens. The more Raskolnikov tries to prove he is above others, the further he sinks. What is pride, if not the fear of being seen as we truly are? And there is one scene that lays this contradiction bare. His conversations with Sonia. He judges her. He sees her as someone inferior, degraded by life. And yet, he desperately seeks her approval. When he confesses his crime to her, it is not an act of courage. It is a plea for validation. He wants Sonia to tell him he was right, that he was a superior man, that his crime was justified. But Sonia says none of that. She only sees his suffering, and she weeps. And in that moment, Raskolnikov comes face to face with the central contradiction that haunts him. If he were truly superior, why did he so desperately need the approval of someone he considered inferior? And here, Dostoevsky gives us one of the novel's most profound lessons. When we believe ourselves to be superior to others, we inevitably seek proof of that superiority. But by despising others, we deny ourselves the only validation that could sustain it. Pride becomes a prison, a trap. Raskolnikov wants to convince himself that he doesn't need anyone, but at the same time his soul cries out for connection. He refuses to admit that he misses Razumikin, that he longs for his mother's love, that he desires Sonia's forgiveness, and this inner anguish destroys him. The superiority he so desperately sought only made him more fragile, more vulnerable. Here, Dostoevsky paints a brilliant portrait of the human condition. At some point, all of us have felt superior to others, whether in intelligence, morality, knowledge, or status. But deep down, that feeling is nothing more than a defense mechanism against something far more painful. The fear of rejection, the fear of not being special, the fear of being just ordinary. Nothing is more unbearable for a man than being completely free and having nothing to restrain his desires. And so, we arrive at the inevitable point. Raskolnikov's superiority is a delusion. He is no Napoleon. He is not above morality. He is merely a man, broken inside, unable to face his own reflection. But there is a way out. There is a path beyond pride, beyond guilt, a path that Dostoevsky masterfully unveils at the end of the novel. The question is, will Raskolnikov be able to accept it? Pride led Raskolnikov to isolation, guilt to agony. And now, faced with the only choice left, he must decide, continue running or surrender to the truth. But what does it mean to surrender? In Dostoevsky's world, redemption is not an abstract concept. Merely admitting a mistake is not enough. You must go through suffering, face it, accept it. Punishment is not just a penalty. It is a rebirth, and that is exactly what happens to Raskolnikov. When he finally goes to the police station and confesses his crime, he is not just admitting what he did, he is renouncing his pride, destroying the illusion of superiority that kept him imprisoned for so long. Pain and suffering are always inevitable for a large intelligence and a deep heart. Truly great men, I believe, must have great sadness on earth. Dostoevsky suggests that suffering can be a bridge to something greater, not a divine punishment, but a form of transformation. For Raskolnikov, imprisonment in Siberia is no longer a condemnation, it is a liberation, and there is a crucial figure in this process: Sonia. She, who lived in absolute misery, who suffered without ever rebelling, becomes the symbol of something Raskolnikov never understood. Love, a love that does not judge, does not demand, does not require greatness. It simply exists. Love reveals to man the meaning of life. At the end of the book, Dostoevsky gives us a glimpse of hope. While Raskolnikov serves his sentence in Siberia, Sonia remains by his side, and in a symbolic moment, he finally cries. For the first time, he does not cry out of guilt or fear. He cries because he realizes he is not alone. Life had been reborn in his heart, and he did not understand it, but a new day was beginning. And here lies the true lesson of crime and punishment. Dostoevsky doesn't just want to show us the downfall of a man who thought himself superior. He wants to show us that pride destroys us, that isolation is a prison worse than any cell, and that redemption doesn't come from punishment, but from reconnecting with others. In the end, Raskolnikov's true punishment wasn't prison, it was pride, and his redemption didn't come from repentance. It came from love. And perhaps this is the greatest lesson of all. No matter how much we try to rise above others, in the end we are only human, and that is where our true strength lies. At the end of Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov discovers a truth that many of us take a lifetime to understand. The idea of superiority is a trap. He believed he could rise above morality, but he was crushed by his own conscience. He thought his intelligence made him special, but he realized that his greatest weakness was believing that in the first place. Dostoevsky warns us of a subtle danger, the arrogance of intellect. That inner voice that makes us think we understand something others don't, that makes us feel like we're one step ahead, more awake, more lucid, more conscious. But are we really? Raskolnikov fell for the illusion that he could be a Napoleon, someone who operates above the rules. But life forced him to face an uncomfortable truth. No one is above the rules of the human heart. There is nothing in the world more difficult than frankness, and nothing easier than flattery. What Dostoevsky shows us is that true strength does not lie in intellectual superiority or in contempt for the world. True strength lies in accepting one's own vulnerability. It lies in recognizing that we are not extraordinary beings destined for grand achievements. We are human, and that is more than enough. In the end, Raskolnikov did not find redemption in a grand theory, but in the simplicity of Sonia, in the love he tried to deny. And that leads us to one final question. How many times do we isolate ourselves out of pride? How many times do we refuse help because we don't want to seem weak? How many times do we convince ourselves we're right just to avoid the fear of admitting we're wrong? Perhaps Crime and Punishment is not just the story of a murderer, but a mirror for all of us. Because to some degree, we have all been Raskolnikov. And the question Dostoevsky leaves us with is, will we be able to see it before it's too late? If you've made it this far, it means this story resonated with you in some way. Maybe because you felt something similar before. Who hasn't isolated themselves out of pride? Who hasn't believed, even for a moment, that they understood something others didn't? That they were above other people's opinions? I've been there myself. There were times when the arrogance of knowledge made me look down on others. I thought that understanding deep concepts, reading great books, and reflecting on existential questions made me different. But life showed me something Dostoevsky knew over a century ago. No theory makes us superior. No idea makes us better than anyone else. In the end, what truly transforms us isn't intelligence, it's connection. And that's why I want to thank you. Because this video isn't just an analysis of Crime and Punishment. It's a conversation. It's an invitation to reflect together on something that, deep down, touches all of us. So if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and comment. Tell me, when in your life have you felt like Raskolnikov? Have you ever fallen into the trap of pride? And of course, if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, now's the time. Here we don't just talk about books, we talk about the ideas that shape our lives. And before you go, there's another video on the screen right now. In it, we explore another Dostoevsky masterpiece that might completely change the way you see the world. I'll see you there.